There is a mythology etched into the American soul. It's a story of a family that, for a brief, shining moment, seemed to hold the world in its hands. We call it Camelot. The name Kennedy itself conjures a cascade of images: immense wealth, political genius, patrician glamour, and a relentless, almost divine ambition. We see the windswept hair on a sailboat, the confident stride of a president, the righteous fury of an attorney general. It's a saga we think we know, a grand opera of triumph and tragedy played out on the world stage. But every great house has its hidden rooms, its whispered stories, its portraits that have been turned to face the wall. What if I told you that one of the most compelling, passionate, and heartbreaking chapters of the Kennedy saga is one that most people have never truly read? It's a story that unfolds not in the corridors of the White House, but in the stately homes and ancient churchyards of England. It is the story of a Kennedy daughter, a princess of the Dynasty, who was blessed with the family's charisma, but cursed with a heart that refused to obey the family's rules. Her name was Kathleen, but the world knew her as Kick. She was a firecracker of life, a woman who dared to love twice, both times against the formidable will of her family and her faith. Hers is a story of defiance, of profound love, and of a tragic exile that continued even after her death. To understand her, we must peel back the layers of the myth and journey into the heart of a woman caught between two worlds, destined to belong fully to neither. This is the untold story of the lost Kennedy. To comprehend the trajectory of Kathleen Kennedy's life, one must first grasp the two formidable worlds that defined her existence: the world of the Kennedys and the world of the British aristocracy. They were universes separated by more than an ocean. They were separated by history, culture, and faith. First, the world of the Kennedys. It was a kingdom built by one man's iron will, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. He was the patriarch, a titan of industry and finance, an Irish Catholic from Boston who had clawed his way to the top of a Protestant-dominated establishment. His ambition was not just for himself, it was dynastic. He saw his 9 children, especially his 4 sons, as the fulfillment of a destiny his ancestors could only dream of, the absolute pinnacle of American power. This ambition created a unique and intensely pressurized environment. The Kennedy homes in Brookline, Hyannisport, and Bronxville were not tranquil sanctuaries. They were training grounds. Life within the Kennedy compound was a relentless exercise in excellence. Mealtimes were intellectual battlegrounds where Joe Sr. would grill his children on politics, history, and economics, expecting sharp, well-reasoned arguments. Weakness or ignorance was not tolerated. Physical activity was equally demanding. Touch football games were brutal, near-contact sports. Sailing races were waged with the intensity of a naval battle. This crucible was designed to forge champions, to instill a permanent hunger for victory and a deep-seated intolerance for second place. The spiritual and moral architect of this dynasty was Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. As the daughter of Boston's famous mayor, Honey Fitz, Rose embodied a different kind of Irish-American success story, one rooted in piety and social grace. Her Catholicism was the bedrock of her existence. It was profound, deeply personal, and absolute. For Rose, the church was not merely a place of worship. It was the ultimate authority on life, death, and eternity. She saw her primary duty as safeguarding the souls of her 9 children, ensuring their adherence to the faith that had sustained her people through centuries of hardship. This faith was a fortress, a source of immense strength and identity, and any deviation from it was not just a disappointment, it was a spiritual catastrophe. Into this whirlwind of worldly ambition and unbending faith Kathleen Agnes Kennedy was born on February 20th, 1920. From her earliest days, she was a radiant anomaly. While her older sisters, Rosemary and Eunice, were more introverted and serious, Kathleen was a supernova of charm and vitality. She was blessed with her father's magnetic charisma, but tempered by a genuine warmth and a mischievous wit that was all her own. It was this irrepressible, energetic nature that earned her the perfect nickname, Kick. She could light up a room with her smile and had a rare gift for making everyone, from servants to senators, feel as if they were the most important person in the world. Yet beneath this sparkling surface lay a fiercely independent spirit and a stubborn streak that would set her on a collision course with the very foundations of her world. The name Kick wasn't just a metaphor for her personality, it was quite literal. Family lore holds that it came from her habit of kicking away her blankets as an infant, a restless energy that simply couldn't be contained. And as she grew, that restlessness translated into a social fearlessness that both enchanted and occasionally exasperated her family. Think about it for a moment. In a household meticulously organized by the famously disciplined Rose, Kick was a whirlwind of beautiful chaos. She was perpetually late, her room was a constant mess, and her belongings were scattered with an abandon that drove her mother to distraction. This wasn't just teenage sloppiness, it was a fundamental difference in temperament. Rose's world was one of order, duty, and spiritual accounting. Kick's world was one of impulse, emotion, and human connection. While her untidiness might have irked her mother, her spirit utterly captivated her father. Joe Kennedy, the formidable patriarch whom so many feared, had a notable soft spot for his effervescent daughter. She was one of the very few people who could tease him, who could meet his intimidating gaze with a playful twinkle in her own eye and get away with it. He saw his own ambition reflected in her, but it was a different kind, an ambition for life itself, for experience and for joy, which he both admired and sought to control. Perhaps her most significant alliance within the family, however, was with her brother Jack. Closer in age and temperament, Kick and the future president were more than just siblings. They were confidants, almost conspirators. They shared a secret language of inside jokes, a cynical wit, and a voracious appetite for books, history, and political gossip. Jack admired her social grace, a skill he himself had to work to cultivate, while she relied on his sharp intellect and steadying presence. They were a perfectly matched pair, and his fondness for her would become a quiet, constant thread running through the tapestry of their lives, a bond that would make her eventual estrangement from the family all the more poignant for him. This gift for connection, this focus on the individual, was the key to her magic. In a family geared toward winning elections and building a legacy, Kick's focus was on the person directly in front of her. She listened. She remembered details. Her charm wasn't a performance. It was an authentic expression of her interest in other people. These were the very qualities: her disregard for rigid order, her fierce loyalty to those she loved, and her belief that personal happiness was a worthy pursuit in its own right, that would make her both the family's greatest social asset and, in time, the source of its most profound private heartbreak. Her entire being was oriented toward a life of passion, not just a life of purpose as defined by others. In 1938, that world was turned upside down. President Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed Joe Kennedy as the United States ambassador to the court of St. James's. The move to London was a monumental step for the family, placing them at the very center of global power as the clouds of war gathered over Europe. For 18-year-old Kick, It was the beginning of everything. London in the late 1930s was a society of dazzling contrasts. It was the heart of a fading empire, a world of immense wealth, ancient tradition, and rigid social codes. It was the world of the London season, a relentless cycle of debutante balls, garden parties, and country weekends, where the daughters of the aristocracy were presented to society. But beneath the glamour, there was a palpable tension. The rise of Hitler cast a long shadow, and Ambassador Kennedy's controversial policy of appeasement was making him an increasingly isolated figure. Into this complex and anxious environment, Kit Kennedy arrived not as a quiet diplomat's daughter, but as a force of nature. American debutantes were often viewed with a degree of condescension by the British upper crust, seen as too loud, too rich, and lacking in refinement. Kit shattered that stereotype. She was utterly unintimidated by the labyrinthine rules of etiquette or the weight of centuries-old titles. Her American directness, her quick wit, and her sheer joy for life were intoxicating. The British press was instantly smitten, breathlessly documenting her every move and christening her the most exciting debutante of 1938. She wasn't just popular, she was a phenomenon. She became fast friends with the scions of Britain's most powerful families, the so-called Cliveden set, and was a fixture in the most exclusive circles. It was within this whirlwind of social success that she met the man who would change her life forever. He was William Billy Cavendish, the Marquis of Hardington. As the eldest son of the 10th Duke of Devonshire, Billy was the heir to one of the most prestigious dukedoms in the United Kingdom. He was destined to inherit not just a title, but a vast estate anchored by Chatsworth House, a magnificent palace in Derbyshire filled with priceless art and sprawling over thousands of acres. He was by every measure the ultimate aristocratic prize. But Billy was far more than his title. He was a man of quiet intelligence, deep integrity, and a gentle, unassuming nature that stood in stark contrast to the often arrogant young men of his class. He wasn't swept up in Kit's social celebrity. He was drawn to the warm, funny, and genuine person beneath it. For Kit, who had grown up in a family where love and approval often felt conditional on achievement, Billy's calm, unconditional affection was a revelation. Their courtship was the stuff of fairy tales. They fell deeply, irrevocably in love. It was a perfect union of New World energy and Old World grace. They were inseparable, their romance blossoming against the backdrop of a world careening towards war. Kit had found her soulmate, a future she desperately wanted. But their love story contained a fatal flaw, a single insurmountable obstacle that would pit Kit against her own family in a battle for her soul. Billy Hardington was a Protestant. To a modern sensibility, this might seem a trivial matter, but in the world of Rose Kennedy, it was an impassable chasm. For her daughter to marry a member of the Church of England, the very institution that had historically oppressed the Irish Catholics, was unthinkable. It was a violation of sacred law. According to the Catholic doctrine of the time, anyone who married a non-Catholic in a non-Catholic ceremony was committing a mortal sin, cutting themselves off from the grace of God and risking eternal damnation. When Kit announced her intention to marry Billy, the reaction from her mother was not one of disappointment, it was one of horror. Rose launched a campaign to stop the marriage. She wrote desperate, heart-wrenching letters to Kit, pleading with her, reasoning with her, and ultimately threatening her. She consulted with high-ranking Catholic clergy, including the future Pope Pius XII, searching for a way to prevent what she saw as her daughter's spiritual ruin. She framed the choice in the starkest possible terms. It was Billy or God. It was a life of love on earth or an eternity in heaven. Kit was tormented. She loved her mother and, in her own way, her faith. She returned to the United States for a period of agonizing months, hoping to broker some kind of peace. But there was no compromise to be had. Rose was unyielding. The conflict created a deep rift within the family. While most of the Kennedy siblings sided with their mother, Kik found a crucial and unwavering ally in her eldest brother, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Joe Jr., the family's golden boy and heir to the political dynasty, adored his sister. He understood the depth of her love for Billie and believed in her right to happiness. He became her confidant and her sole defender against the family's unified opposition. Faced with an impossible choice, Kik did the unthinkable. She chose love. With her brother's support, she resolved to marry Billie, regardless of the consequences. She returned to England, knowing she was likely severing ties with her mother forever. On May 6, 1944, as the Allied forces were preparing for the D-Day invasion, Kathleen Kennedy became the Marquess of Hardington. The ceremony was a stark reflection of her painful predicament. It was not a grand affair in a Catholic cathedral. It was a brief, sterile proceeding in a civil registry office in Chelsea. Kik wore a simple, elegant pink dress. The only member of her family present was her brother, Joe Jr., who flew in on a military transport to give her away. His presence was an immense act of loyalty, a solitary beacon of support. But the echoing absence of her parents and her 7 other siblings was a public and painful testament to her estrangement. She had become British nobility, but in doing so, she had been cast out of the Kennedy kingdom. The happiness she had fought so hard for was tragically, cruelly fleeting. The world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War. Just 4 weeks after their wedding, Billie, a captain in the elite Coldstream Guards, was called to active duty and sent to the front lines in France. Their brief time together was over. They exchanged loving, hopeful letters, dreaming of the life they would build at Chatsworth after the war was won. That future never materialized. On August 12, 1944, tragedy struck the Kennedy family first. Joe Jr., Kik's beloved brother and staunchest ally, was killed when his bomber, packed with explosives for a secret mission, detonated prematurely over the English Channel. Kik was devastated. The one person in her family who truly understood her choice was gone. 1 month later, fate delivered its second catastrophic blow. On September 10, 1944, during fierce fighting to liberate Belgium, Captain Billie Hardington was killed instantly by a German sniper's bullet. He had been married for just over 4 months. He was 26 years old. The news shattered Kik's world. At the age of 24, she was a widow. The grand title she bore, Dowager Marchioness of Hardington, was now a hollow, painful echo of a lost love. Her family in America, grieving their own loss, urged her to come home. It would have been the logical path to retreat to the comfort and familiarity of Hyannisport. But Kik Kennedy rarely chose the logical path. She chose the one her heart demanded. To understand why she stayed, you have to understand what returning home would have truly meant. To go back to the Kennedy fold would be to walk directly into the quiet, sorrowful validation of her mother's worst fears. It would have meant facing Rose's grief, which was undoubtedly intertwined with a belief that this tragedy was the spiritual consequence of her daughter's disobedience. It would be a constant, unspoken "I told you so," a life sentence of being the cautionary tale. Kik's fierce pride, the very independence that led her to Billie, could not bear such a surrender. And there was something else. In England, she wasn't just a Kennedy daughter. She was the Marchioness of Hardington. She was Billie's wife. To retreat to America would be to shed that identity, to once again become just one of Joe and Rose Kennedy's children. Her brief, brilliant chapter as a wife and noblewoman reduced to a tragic footnote. She had fought too hard for that life to let it be erased by grief. More than anything, however, she stayed because she had found a different kind of family. While her own had offered judgment, Billy's family, the Devonshires, offered solace. The Duke of Devonshire, a man of profound dignity and quiet sorrow, didn't see her as the rebellious Catholic girl who had lured his son away. He saw her as the woman his son had adored, and he embraced her as his own grieving daughter. At Chatsworth, amidst the grandeur and the ghosts, she was enveloped in a shared sense of loss that was pure and uncomplicated. They mourned Billy together, and in that shared grief she found a sense of belonging that was deeper than blood. This was a family bound not by ambition or doctrine, but by a mutual love for the man they had all lost. So she made her choice. Staying in England was an act of quiet defiance. It was a declaration that her love story, however short, was not a mistake. It was an act of ultimate loyalty to Billy's memory, a refusal to abandon the life they had started. She would remain in her adopted country, a ghost in her own fairy tale, a young American widow navigating the somber, echoing halls of the British aristocracy. Her anchor was gone. Her staunchest ally was dead, and she was an ocean away from her kin, but she would face the future here, in the land where she had found her greatest joy and her deepest sorrow. As the war ended and Europe began to slowly heal, Kick tried to rebuild her life. She moved from the countryside back to London, to a small, elegant house in Mayfair. She remained a fixture of London society, beautiful, witty, and now imbued with a tragic glamour. She was still young, but the carefree girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had known profound love and even more profound loss. It was in this post-war landscape that she embarked on her second and final love affair, a relationship that would prove even more scandalous and destructive than the first. His name was Peter Wentworth Fitzwilliam, the 8th Earl Fitzwilliam. If Billy Hardington represented the pinnacle of respectable, honorable aristocracy, Earl Fitzwilliam was his polar opposite. He was a figure straight from a romance novel, impossibly wealthy, with a vast fortune from coal mines and land holdings that dwarfed even the Devonshires. He was also a notorious rake, a hard-drinking, high-stakes gambler with a passion for horse racing and a long list of discarded mistresses. He was charismatic, dangerous, and thrilling. And most significantly, he was a married man who was in the midst of a contentious divorce. For Kick, who had been living in the shadow of grief, Peter's vibrant, commanding presence was perhaps an irresistible life force. He pursued her relentlessly, and she fell for him. Their relationship was passionate, public, and fraught with peril. For Rose Kennedy, this was the ultimate transgression. Her daughter was now involved with a Protestant, a soon-to-be divorcee, and a man whose hedonistic lifestyle was an affront to everything the Kennedys professed to be. The news of the affair triggered the final irreparable rupture. Rose delivered her ultimatum. It was clear and cold. If Kick married Fitzwilliam, she would be disowned, not just shunned, but completely cut off, financially and emotionally. She would be dead to the family. Joe Kennedy Sr., ever the pragmatist, was also opposed, but for different reasons. He flew to London to confront his daughter, not about her immortal soul, but about the potential for scandal. His son, John F. Kennedy, was now a promising young congressman from Massachusetts. A sister embroiled in a messy affair with a divorced British earl was a political liability he could not afford. Kick was once again trapped in an impossible position. She was deeply in love with Peter, but the threat of being permanently severed from her entire family was a terrifying prospect. She confided in a friend about the unbearable strain, yet she could not bring herself to give Peter up. They made plans to marry as soon as his divorce was finalized. In May of 1948, they decided to take a short holiday together, a brief escape to the French Riviera. On May 13th, they boarded a small 10-seater de Havilland Dove aircraft at Le Bourget Airport in Paris for the flight south. The weather reports were ominous, with warnings of violent thunderstorms along their route. The pilot was urged to consider turning back or choosing an alternate path. For reasons that will never be known, he pushed forward. Over the rugged mountains of the Ardèche region in southern France, the small plane encountered the full fury of the storm. It was tossed about violently before it broke apart in midair and plummeted to the earth. There were no survivors. Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy, the rebel princess who had chased love across an ocean and defied a dynasty, was dead. She was 28 years old. The aftermath of the crash is the starkest evidence of Kick's tragic exile. The family's reaction laid bare the chasm that had opened between them. Upon hearing the news, only one member of the Kennedy family made the journey to Europe to claim her body and attend her funeral, her father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr.'s. As Kennedy refused to go, her daughter had died in her eyes, in a state of mortal sin, on her way to a tryst with her married lover. Rose's grief, which must have been immense, was walled off by her rigid moral judgment. She would not publicly mourn the daughter who had died in such a state of defiance, and not one of Kick's 7 surviving siblings, not Jack, not Bobby, not Eunice, not Pat, not Jean, not Ted, attended the funeral. The family that presented a united front of loyalty to the world remained absent. The funeral was a small, somber affair in the tiny English village of Edensor, on the grounds of the Chatsworth estate. It was a gray, rainy day. The mourners were mostly British, Kick's aristocratic friends, and her beloved in-laws, the Devonshires, who had claimed her as their own to the very end. And standing among them, a solitary and tragic figure, was Joe Kennedy, the powerful patriarch, alone in his grief. The scene was a public monument to a private tragedy, a chilling declaration of the family's ultimate rejection. They buried Kathleen Kennedy in the Cavendish family plot, next to her husband Billy. She lies there still, an American girl forever in English soil. Her gravestone, chosen by the Duke of Devonshire, bears a simple, poignant epitaph: "Joy she gave, joy she has found." Kick Kennedy's life was a brief, brilliant, and ultimately tragic story, but it is a vital part of the Kennedy saga, for it reveals the profound human cost of the family's relentless ambition and rigid dogma. Her story forces us to reconsider the Camelot myth, to see the cracks in the polished facade. It shows us a Rose Kennedy whose piety could lead to a heartbreaking lack of compassion in a family whose famous loyalty had its limits. And it's in the quiet aftermath, in the years that followed, that the true weight of her loss and the complexity of her legacy really come into focus. Consider for a moment the lone figure of Joe Kennedy at that graveside. A man often depicted as a cold, calculating puppeteer, he was also a father who had now lost his 2 eldest, most charismatic children. His presence in England was likely a complex mixture of genuine shattering grief for the daughter who charmed him like no other, and the pragmatic need of a patriarch to manage a crisis, to ensure the family name was represented however sparsely. He was performing a duty both as a father and as the head of a dynasty, and the loneliness of that duty is palpable. Then there were the absent siblings. One can only imagine the conflict that must have raged within her brother Jack. He had lost his favorite sister, his confidant and witty co-conspirator, yet he adhered to the family line, bowing to the iron will of his mother and the solid front of the clan. His absence and that of the others speaks volumes about the powerful, unassailable authority Rose held in matters of faith and family discipline. It reveals that even for these future leaders of the free world, the politics of their own family were a force to be reckoned with, a force that could command them to stay home while their sister was laid to rest an ocean away. It is impossible not to wonder about the what if. What if that small plane had never taken off? Had she lived, Kik would have become the Countess Fitzwilliam, a major figure in British society with unparalleled connections. During the years of Camelot, she would not have just been the president's sister. She would have been his most valuable unofficial ambassador, a bridge between Washington and London. Her famous charm, a potent tool of soft diplomacy during the height of the Cold War. Her independent cosmopolitan perspective might have offered a different kind of counsel, a voice outside the bubble of Washington politics. Her loss was not just a personal tragedy, it was a loss to history. For decades, her story remained something of a whisper within the larger Kennedy narrative, a sad cautionary tale of the girl who strayed too far. But as time has passed, her legacy has been re-examined. She is seen now not just as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman of immense courage who made conscious, difficult choices. In a world and a family where a woman's role was strictly defined, she insisted on her right to choose her own husband, her own home, and her own happiness, whatever the cost. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.